Good morning and welcome to Fundamental Mathematics. Today we are going to be covering Unit 6, or starting on Unit 6 rather, which is looking at measurements. Today we're going to be doing 6.1, which is looking at imperial or US or standard metric conversions. A lot of these should be familiar to you. Some of them may be a little less familiar, but we'll go ahead and get started with some that you should be familiar with, hopefully, and then we'll go from there. So when we talk about measurement, there are two sorts of modes of thought. We have the imperial system, which is more commonly in the United States known as the US system or the English system. A lot of these are very similar with a few slight differences depending on which country is using them. But for the most part, we're looking at a unit of measurement that is not metric, non-metric. So metric on the other side of it is looking at grams and meters and liters, and then units of that on a base 10 system. However, in the United States, we typically use, again, what is more colloquially known as the imperial system, but also known as the English system. And so for one or the other, this system does have a few sort of irregular sets of measurement. It doesn't rely on something like base 10 like the metric system does. And so if you grew up in the United States or somewhere close by, a lot of these you're familiar with. So you start out with basic unit measurements, let's say distance, right? A lot of us can say that 12 inches are equivalent to 1 foot. Right? A lot of us have that memorized from elementary. 3 feet is equivalent to 1 yard. And those types of measurements are more common in our brain. You might also remember that 5,280 feet is equal to 1 mile. Right now, if you hadn't just memorized that from elementary school or what have you, you'd have no way of knowing that, right? There's nothing in the name feet or mile that would imply that the conversion rate should be 5,280. So it is something, unfortunately, that you just sort of have to memorize. Now, if you're watching this video and you're in my class, I'll switch screen shares here. And there are plenty of these on the internet that you can, if you type in metric conversions or English conversions, they'll have them. But if you're looking on your supplemental resources from my class, on the PDF that's listed on the top left of supplemental resources, in the top left corner of that PDF file, you'll have units of length in the US system. So it'll tell you here, a foot is 12 inches, a yard is 3 feet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these unit conversions, I'll kind of briefly mention them on the whiteboard, but all of those conversions are there if you need them. For my class, of course, you're allowed to use your notes, so you're welcome to go back and access this document if you need to. The hope is that you have a lot of the more, let's say, common measurements memorized. If you're taking a standardized test, let's say, and they wanted you to convert inches to feet, they're not going to tell you that 12 inches are in a foot. They're going to expect that you know that already. If it's less common, something a little bit crazier, then they'll give you the conversion rate. Okay. Now, what this looks like on an assignment or on a standardized test is having these unit conversions in mind, you're going to be asked to convert from one to another. Now, if I just give you 1 foot, for instance, that's easy, 12 inches, or 1 mile, that's easy, 5,280 feet. But more commonly, you're going to be given another value and asked to convert to a different unit of measurement. So for instance, if I asked you for, let's say, 3 feet, and I asked you to convert that to inches, the question is, how do you do that? For all of these operations, you're going to be either dividing or multiplying by whatever the unit rate for your conversion is. Now, we just got done saying that there are 12 inches in a foot. So if I wanted to convert feet to inches, every foot is 12 inches, which means I would need to multiply it by 12. So to go from feet to inches, it's like multiplying by the fraction 12 inches over 1 foot. For every foot, it's 12 inches to a foot. So we're multiplying that. And then just like any whole number and fraction that we multiply, you're multiplying straight across. You get 3 times 12. And feet would cancel out here, which leaves you with 36 inches, like so. And number 2 here, let's say I wanted to go from 15 yards and I wanted to convert that to feet, for instance. Okay, well, every yard has 3 feet, so 3 feet per 1 yard. I would get 15 times 3. The yards would cancel out, and that leaves me with feet. Now, in examples 1 and 2 here, we had to multiply because of the unit rate. However, if I was going from big to small, let's say I wanted to convert, let's say 21,160 feet into miles, well, then I would need to multiply that by 1 mile over the conversion rate, which is 5,280 feet. So here we're dividing instead of multiplying. You can use a calculator here. 21,160 divided by 5,280. Feet will cancel out, which would leave me with 4 miles. You are going to have a similar conversion process, not only for distance, but also for weight, and specific assignment, also for volume. Now, weight's pretty easy. There's 16 ounces to a pound, and there are 2,000 pounds to a ton. You should have those metrics memorized, but if you don't, they're on your conversion sheet here. Again, for a standardized test, they're probably not going to give those to you. And then when we get into volume, I would say is the more commonly forgotten rate of conversion, right? Now, a couple of us might remember some of these looking here on the sheet. Okay, yeah, there are 2 cups to a pint. There are 4 quarts. That sounds like quarters. There are 4 quarts to a gallon. But going from pints to quarts or gallons to cups, those get a little confusing. Even on the lower end, if we're talking about cup measurements, there's 3 teaspoons to a tablespoon. A lot of students forget that conversion rate. So all of these are listed here on your conversion sheet. And just like we did in numbers 1 through 3, you're expected to be able to convert from one to the other. So for instance, pull it up here on my whiteboard. I'm going to skip the weight just because 16 ounces to a pound and 2,000 pounds to a ton, that's typically remembered by most students. But if not, that conversion rate is there. But let's look at some of these here. So let's say I had, could start out with something like 16 quarts. And I want to convert that to cups. Now, sometimes you're not going to have just a straight across conversion rate. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. If you're using your conversion sheet that's provided to you on the supplemental resources, it says that there is 1 quart to every 2 pints, and there is 1 pint to every 2 cups. Now, you might know that 1 quart is 4 cups. So here on the side, you might know that 1 quart is 4 cups. Now, if you know that conversion rate, then it's just like we did in numbers 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to take 16 quarts. I'm going to multiply it by the unit rate. There are 4 cups for every 1 quart. Here, quarts cancel out, and I am multiplying 16 times 4 to get 64 cups, like so. But let's say I didn't know that. Let's say I didn't have that information, but I can look here and say, okay, well, 1 quart is 2 pints, and 1 pint is 2 cups. You can still get the same answer, but if you don't have that direct conversion rate, then you're going to have to take 2 steps to convert from first quarts to pints, and then from pints to cups. So I would take my 16 quarts. I would multiply it by the conversion rate, 2 pints to a quart. Your quarts would cancel out. 16 times 2 gives you 32 pints. And then from here, 32 pints times, there are 2 cups to a pint. Pints cancel out. 32 times 2 gives you 64 cups, like so. Now, you guys have been doing this since elementary school, and again, some of these are a little more archaic. It's not like the metric system where you just have a very clear multiply by a factor of 10 or divide by a factor of 10. So even adults sometimes forget some of these conversion rates. If you need them, they're on that cheat sheet. Otherwise, other than that, if you have any questions, please reach out to me during office hours. Otherwise, have a good day. I will talk to you soon.